right. Welcome to another episode of Black Representation in the Curriculum, where we have conversations about equity, culture, and teaching and belonging. So today I'm thrilled to have our guest, Dr. Grant Goodman, who's been a mental health therapist for 11 years. Dr. Grant Goodman, I'm excited to have you here. Um, I am excited about our conversations for a lot of reasons, and let's get into it and have you introduce yourself, and then we'll go from
Mhm.
there.
Yeah. I'm excited to be here with you this afternoon having this conversation as well. So, like you said, I'm Dr. Whitley Grant-Goodman, therapist, speaker, entrepreneur. My main niche population is supporting high achieving Black women, navigating high pressure environments. A lot of my clients deal with burnout, issues around psychological safety, and managing multiple roles. So, I've been a therapist now for almost 11 years. I count from not when I graduated from my master's program, but from when I passed my licensure exam. So that was May of 2015. So
Uh-huh.
almost 11 years now. I have several different experiences. I worked in community based counseling for some time. I did some work on the college counseling setting as well. And now being in full time private practice work for almost 3 years this year. So yeah, super excited to dive into this conversation with you this afternoon.
Awesome. Awesome. So you have worked, okay, you've worked in mental health and now you're in educational leadership. I don't want to necessarily give it away, but I know that you focus on working with Black women, right? Can you go into, a little bit of your work with that on Black women and why you choose this as your focus?
Mhm.
I know I don't want to say it's obvious, but yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So last year I completed my PhD in higher education from University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And my dissertation work was about experiences of racial trauma with Black women,
Mm,
student affairs professionals working in historically white environments. So I
mhm,
was already kind of doing that work, but the PhD process kind of helps you have the language for creating frameworks. It really gives you
mhm,
like a guide in terms of how you want to frame your work. But mainly the themes that I work on are around burnout. So that could look like hypervisibility and
mhm,
invisibility at the same time. So
mm,
navigating that space of maybe micromanaging in the workspace, but at the same time feeling invisible because you're well underrepresented in your department or wherever you work. This idea of overperforming, so having to work 2, 3 times as hard. And then what I've seen a lot from my clientele is we're not just holding this space within the professional setting, but it could also be in the home environment as well. So
mm,
you're navigating this idea of leadership professionally. You might be a caregiver, partner, leader in your community in some capacity. A lot of my clients, again, with the burnout, they experience anxiety, resentment, loss of identity as they're working towards trying to, I guess, really unattach themselves from just feeling like I'm only what I do for work. Like my identity is so caught up in my professional background that I struggle to even take that, what we talk about, the superwoman cape, like taking that off sometimes.
mm.
So yes, that's what I mainly see from my niche population.
Wow.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. So many directions we can go in there. I was
Yes,
so
yes,
I was
yes.
I was so intrigued when you talk about work and home.
Mhm,
I know we talk about work and there are people who talk about what happens at work.
mhm,
I am also curious about home. But okay, so let's start about what are some pressing things um that Black women, I guess if you were to say look at patterns and trends, what's something that keeps coming up, over and over again?
mhm.
Mhm,
Yeah, so this idea of overfunctioning, right? Trying to be everything to everybody, inclusive of the work environment.
mhm,
feeling guilty about resting, right? I feel like
Mm,
and maybe this is just my algorithm because I'm a therapist and a Black woman, but
yeah.
on my platforms or in my conversations with others, I'm seeing just this narrative around people moving to this idea of rest, like
Mm,
rest and the idea of restoration, rest is a form of resistance, all of these things.
mhm,
And you can say these things to folks, but if you are a high achieving Black woman who's super stressed, you might feel guilty about trying to rest. So you can't your mind, even if you're physically trying to rest, your mind might still be wandering on all the things that you have to accomplish.
right.
Just the emotional labor of having to code switch and be multiple different people in different environments, and then just the chronic stress and burnout. And I say one thing too that I see a lot that has it's come up through my work as a mental health therapist, but even most recently I was reading this book called Shrinking,
Mhm,
and it was talking about just again those multiple roles that Black women hold, and then also just thinking about the ways in which people cope that can be overwhelming. So for like example, instead of dealing with their mental health concerns, maybe they overeat. Instead of dealing with mental health concerns, maybe there is some substance misuse involved. Instead of dealing with these concerns, you might try to paint it over with purchases, right? Like, you know how we have that messaging, if we look good, we feel good, right? But you can look good and internally you still can be struggling with how you feel. And then, of course, just this burnout. And I see burnout pop up all the time. So feeling
mhm,
exhausted, feeling irritated, feeling emotionally numb, not really having a way to properly express your feelings. So you struggle with asking for help, you struggle with
mhm,
being vulnerable, and you might even struggle with crying, right? So if you don't cry in response to something that's happening, it could come out in other ways. So
mhm,
physical exhaustion, high blood pressure, headaches, stomach aches, all the things. So these are things that I just see all of the time, whether it be in the research that I've done. I
mhm,
also do a lot of corporate trainings and speaking and trying to get more to corporate trainers and organizations. So when I'm in conversation with folks in those spaces, I hear those themes as well.
mm. Wow. I am so curious because, I've heard this before listening to other people. But one of the things I'm so curious about now is really thinking about the way we attach our identity to overworking, right? I'm wondering, if we were to do the identity work, you know, to try to detach ourselves, I mean, is that the solution? What is the solution and how should we? Because, that's something that I realize I never, we've talked about trauma with I've talked about trauma with different people and I've listened to people talk about different trauma. But
Hmm.
really, how should we as Black women think about um, detaching ourselves from identity that's not healthy or helpful to us and still maintain a sense of respect? Because part of that identity, I believe, comes from feeling that need as well. What have you noticed and what would you recommend?
Mhm, mhm. So when it comes to detachment, it takes a certain amount of unlearning, right? Because if
Mm,
we've been giving messages, because I feel like what's showing up in my work and again my research, is that Black women attach themselves to these professional roles because we're actively trying to negate this narrative that we are what welfare queens, like just keeping it
mm,
plain English. I think that term was established in what the 80s. So even as
yeah.
you think about, and then even in I'm thinking about the 60s and 70s and this movement towards education being the platform to getting you out of certain spaces, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not saying we overeducate, but I again seeing these things in the media about narratives that Black women when we feel trauma or unsettled, it's like, okay, let me sign up for a new workshop. Let me sign up for it. Let me get another degree. Let me go back
Mm,
to school again and get the fourth, fifth degree. But what happens is that it just takes a certain level of um, identity work to be able to divorce yourself from the need to just be on all the time. So I think
Mm,
the first step is just awareness. So knowing that this is a thing. I would say the second step is to, I would say engage in therapy, but I know not everybody is ready for those one-on-one spaces. But there's lots of books and literature and podcasts out there that exist that talks about what that looks like. So like even I said, the book I've been reading most recently called Shifting, and I'll have to send you that resource. I can't think of the author's name at the moment, but the book it dives deeper into what it means, why these things are coming up for different Black women across the country, and
uh-huh,
then tips and techniques to be able to actively refute that. So another book that I read recently and like to use with my clients and in corporate spaces is this book, My Grandmother's Hands. It also talks about like nervous system type of techniques. So that could look like yoga, that could look like grounding exercise, that could look like
mhm,
breathing techniques. So really being able to sit with the emotions that come up, and then engaging in activities that have nothing to do with your work, which can be hard for us because again, if we're
mhm,
always constantly thinking about success or something we have to manage from work, it can be hard for us to even turn that part of our brains off and to say, okay, what am I doing that has nothing to do with the work? So like even during COVID, I mean, I feel like COVID was a time when people were actively doing that because they were
mhm,
forced to stay in their house and do things a little bit differently. But you have people
mhm,
who have plants. You have people, I'm talking about like gardening. I know a lot of folks are picking up pickleball, right? So and then just being in community with others, but doing things that do not fall up under what you do for work is one of, and to make those things just as important as your work. So having hobbies and interests that are outside of the work that you do can help with the process of like my identity as a professor or as a therapist or as
mhm,
a lawyer, as a doctor, whatever. This is not all that I am. I also hold these
mm.
other roles as well.
Wow. I'm so curious because what other identity do you think we've been combating,
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
welfare queen is one. What are some
Mhm.
others?
The superwoman syndrome or superwoman,
Okay.
right? Trying to be all the things to everybody in all the spaces. I would say that's another one as well that comes up a lot. And I feel like those are the two main ones that I see because I think they kind of counteract one another. So like you don't want to be assigned with this, so maybe that stops you from being able to ask for help because
Mhm.
there's this narrative that help seeking is equals weakness or that you're is bad or that you
Mm.
um should be able to do it on your own. So I feel like those two things kind of trying to actively combat this one, but unintentionally aligning with the other one is can be the one that really causes a lot of mental angst for the folks that I work with.
Where did the superwoman one come from, you think?
Hmm.
Is that part of the Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say the Superwoman complex, I would say, came from I think it has its I would say it has its roots in slavery, right? We talk about mammy and mammification, even in my dissertation research. One of the things that came up, and you might even experience this as a Black woman in the academy, is this idea of other mothering and then the
Mhm.
roles that you have to uphold for students that might not be expected for other people from different demographics. So and then it just goes back to that mothering type of work that's not always recognizable or recognized. So when you hold that space at work and then the same thing in your community, you might be the strong one in your family. So people are dependent upon you for everything. And then another thing that I see too is maybe you even have an outside role, let's say like so in your sorority or in your church or something, but you have a position of power within those spaces. So again, it's hard for you to even have ability to rest and chill outside of your professional environment because wherever you are, you're constantly taking on just these large responsibilities that just take up a lot of your mental energy.
Hmm. Wow. I oh my goodness. I've seen the superwoman relate to trying to be the superwoman. I'd love to kind of delve into this when it comes to our own personal relationships because, I've seen a little bit of it in me, and I shouldn't say not anymore. It's something, I've dealt with in therapy, and you talked about it. We did marriage counseling, but the way it comes out also is, um, in us trying to overcompensate sometimes, in us trying to save the day. And I think the biggest lesson for me has been really being willing to sometimes let things fail, let it go, right? And I've had, conversations with friends, but that same conversation, um, we get upset and we don't let it go, and then it happens again, we get upset. So what advice do you have for women? I want to talk about how it comes up in relationships because a lot of times that's
Mhm.
where it starts, right?
Mhm.
That's where you
Mhm.
exercise it.
Mhm.
That's where it grows, that's where it festers, and then
Mhm.
it's, it spills over into society, and then what society
Mhm.
is spills over into relationships. But
Mhm.
can you speak a little bit to that in terms of, what you advise?
Mhm. 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 Yeah. So again, the first step is awareness, right? So as you're listening to like conversations we have about what it means to be the superwoman and to have to be the strong one in multiple areas of your life, it's like first let me get some clarity on what this looks like so I can properly be able to do some self-assessment and know say, oh yeah, I'm definitely showing up as a superwoman in these spaces. I would say the second thing is we talk a lot about again, this might just I keep saying my algorithm. Got to realize not everybody listens to the same thing that I listen to all the time. I'm talking about outside of work. I'm talking about I could be scrolling on social media, I could be reading a book or something. But people have been talking more lately about the ability to set boundaries. So to understand where let's set this boundary early before we get overexhausted, before we end up in some type of medical crisis because we having headaches, we have hot, all the things. Like let's work on instituting some boundaries early on before we even get to the point of overwhelm. So then
Mm,
what that looks like. So when people talk about no being a complete sentence, not feeling the need to over explain why you can't make it to this event or why sorry friend, I can't hold space for you right now. Right? Like I understand you want to call me and express something happening in your relationship, blah, 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 or something happened at work. I get that. And I want to hold space for you. But look, let's talk about that. Let me give you a call back on Sunday or
mhm,
something. You know what I mean? Like that's what boundaries can look like. Being very
yeah,
protective of your time and then it's your boundary. So it's like you have to stand firm in it. And then also maybe there is some flexibility, right? So if there's a boundary that you have up around like family or something like your family might not know this, but I only talk to my family on Friday evenings or Sunday mornings or Saturday afternoon because that's when I'm my best space mentally. They don't have to know that. I'm only talking to you on Fridays at 2. I'm only talking to you on Sunday after church. That's just something that you can create and then being very protective of your time. So I think boundary setting is a big one as well. But just to be able to do um just some reoccurring self-assessment of how you feel from day to day. Like, what's your energy look like at the end of the in the evening? What's your energy
mhm,
levels like? And then if it's like, oh, I'm exhausted. So let's take a step back and look at what has occurred throughout the day that has led to this point. So I
yeah,
think that's one of the main thing is like an energy assessment, seeing where boundaries need to be set, active communication, not being avoidant when an issue arises within relationship dynamics can be helpful as well. So those are just some of the places I think folks can really start.
yeah. Wow. I also wonder if some of this comes about because we, especially if it's people, those of us who are married, we have spouses, partners, whatever we call them. Um, I wonder also if it comes from having low expectations of men. Because, and I'm saying this because, now that I'm a part of a church and I listen to conversations, making sense of how you reconcile some of what you listen to as the teachings with, some of what makes sense to me. I wonder to what extent it comes from having low expectations. And I say this because I believe that the only way we'll know if whoever we're with may rise to the occasion is if we let go and just allow them to rise to the occasion, right? And to be so that they can contribute to whatever it is that's part of the household, as we talk about it. Um, and I mentioned this before because I grew up with my mom, my grandparents, and I was never going to allow myself to simply be the one to just do everything. So, and I know now, not a lot of women did not grow up like that. This is a conversation I find myself having with women because a lot of them
Mhm.
didn't grow up thinking like that. And
Mhm.
so they almost demean themselves by allowing themselves to be placed in a position where they are allowed to just do everything. And I've had friends where, I'm thinking of a couple friends in particular where they couldn't let go. They had to control things a certain way. The laundry has to be done this way, this way. And I understand. But I knew that if I didn't let go, I'd be doing everything, right? If you let go of that perfectionism too. So I'm just wondering, where do you see, women's expectations influencing this and maybe even impacting and vice versa, men's expectations? Because sometimes we confuse the idea of leading means, oh, I lead, so that person has to do everything, right? Or I lead, so I have to do everything. It's almost like I see like an opposite, like something is wrong there. There's a dissonance.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, okay, okay. Listen, you are speaking my language now. We're diving into it
We
now. So
clarify,
yes, we are diving into things. So yes, I would say that expectations, you said two things that really stood out to me that I think is so, so important. Well, all of it is important, but two things I really want to highlight. The expectations in on both ends, right? So I think about relationships and no shade to millennials, that's my generation, I love y'all. But millennial women, just from what I've seen, there's some burnout that exists from this idea of like, um, being what is it, married single mom? I see that come up a lot as a theme, and I've also seen that as well, where people do that, where they are, things are different. We're not growing up in a generation of maybe our grandparents and generations before where only one person in the family was working or I mean, and again, back then, a woman couldn't have access to a credit card, maybe couldn't get a home loan on her own. So the things where women have changed where we have more access. So when you're stepping into a relationship,
Mhm,
there's that idea of one person leading because they're further along financially might not necessarily exist. So it's almost like
mhm,
we're having to remix in some ways what the expectations are of, and I'm just talking about different gender relationships right now. And,
mhm,
if we talk about same gender relationships, that adds a different level. We might wanna look at things a little bit differently. But in
mhm,
heterosexual relationships, we have to really change the expectations of each role because we're not living in the 1940s, 50s, wherever, where this person was solely responsible for the household. Both people are working now, so we need to rework and do things a little bit differently. So
mhm,
I know personally because it's this narrative that even when people have kids, right, it's all automatically the mom's responsibility, like to know everything, to be the one that takes to the doctor appointments, to get them dressed, all the things.
mhm,
However, if that's what you learn growing up, and then when you have a child with someone, and now you have this expectation that the dad doesn't have to do certain things because they're a man, then that creates additional issues for you. And then also, if you're allowing this person to and not it's not allowing, this person should step up and do things as a parent, even if
mhm,
they are a father, and then understand that they don't have to do things perfectly as the way you would do them.
Right.
right? They don't have to do things perfectly. So maybe you fold the clothes on this way, maybe you put the Pampers in the drawer this way, right? So
Mhm.
allowing the other person to also show up and parent and understanding that the way that you do things is not the only way to do them. So it's like two things. Having expectations for the person that you're in a relationship with, that this is just something that we do. This is just an expectation for us as a couple. These are couple expectations. And then on the flip side, if that person doesn't do things just like you do them, that's when you gotta release some self. Now you might be a little bit controlling. They didn't put the dishes in the dishwasher this way. They didn't wash the dishes in the sink this way. They left the
Yeah.
dishes in the sink for 1 hour. I would have done things this way. Again, that's the way that you would have done things. So I think that's when we put additional stressors on ourselves when we don't have expectations
Mhm.
for our partners. And if they do something, um, if we share some type of responsibility and they don't do the way that we want it done, we
Mhm.
perceive that as wrong. So I think, yeah, that's multiple things coming up there. I think that's a trend or thing that I see a lot where folks we just have to rework. It's so complicated and complex, and I don't know how we're gonna do that, but we gonna have
Mm.
to rework these relationship expectations because it is 2026. Black women sometimes in households might be the primary breadwinner. So if the person who quote unquote leads is just attached to salary, then what does that look like when it's different and
Right.
when it's different gender wise? So yeah, we it's gonna be some strong reworking there. But just
Yeah.
for for point of this podcast and again, my work with Black women, if you
Mhm.
are the person having expectations, for the person that you're with, and then also understanding that the person doesn't have to do it just like you do it for it to be done the correct or right way. So releasing some
Mhm.
of that control.
Wow. Yeah, I just it's releasing that control and I'm always concerned when I see people swing from one extreme to the next, right? To assume that uh because a lot of times also I observe that because they haven't really done the inner work to realize that it is their own self concept, right? How that affects identity that contributes to this dynamic, right? And swinging to the other extreme, with assumptions, and I see a lot of people do that. I see it happens when people go to the extreme of, thinking that, from a religious perspective, you need to be one way as well. And from a different perspective, you just need to be the other way. Um, I'm curious about, I also, because, I'm married and I also have a son, and I've hung out with mostly parents who have
Mhm.
sons.
Mhm. Mhm.
I listened to my mom talking about, even though she never had a son, about observing how to raise her son. She was one of seven, but she had five brothers, right?
Okay.
Um, and one sister. So it's something she would talk about too. Something that I think about, how we raise our sons,
Mhm.
because it almost seems like it starts there.
Mm. Mhm.
That's what I've observed. I'm curious of what you've observed.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm gonna quote our former forever first lady when she talked about what did she say? Raising our daughters, and I don't know if she said catering to our sons or
Mm,
something of that
mhm.
nature. And then also
Yeah.
just where folks get that from, right? Like we need to protect our sons because um there's a narrative that they are the only ones facing harm, right? Black women are not struggling or black girls are not struggling because again, what are they saying? We're the most educated demographic in the country. So you don't need any assistance, you don't need any help. You're getting A's, A, B, honor roll, all the things in your household. So only this particular demographic or this particular gender needs to be protected or coaxed or helped or worried about in your family. So yeah, I would say it definitely starts in the household and just the expectations that we have for sons versus daughters. Like, I hear this show up all the time with clientele, speaking spaces where they can have it can be siblings, uh, friends, everybody. So I see this show up everywhere. So even somebody listening, they like, Whitley, I know you're on podcast telling my business. No, I see this show up everywhere. Cause one thing about being a therapist, I'm always having these intense conversations, even with people who I haven't even had a long-term relationship with. Like we just have a casual convo. But when people have like brothers and how they're treated and the expectations in their family dynamic versus their brother. So the daughter is responsible for planning the family events, for if something happens to the parents, she's responsible for getting the estate together. The parent is even telling you, I'm putting you on the estate, I'm putting you on the will. These are going to be your responsibilities when we pass. It's your role to hold the family system together. Yeah, you know how your brother is,
The
blah blah
pressure.
blah. Right. And the brother doesn't even have it doesn't even have to be a younger brother. The brother could be 5 or 6 years older. And there's still
Mhm.
this expectation of the daughter in the household that the son might not have. So yeah, I would say it starts I would say it starts very early.
Mm.
And I also have a son as well. Well,
Mhm.
he's little. He's only 60, but very little.
Well,
But yeah, I also have a son, but I can just tell even
mhm.
when I've been in various relationships, like the expectation I have as a oldest daughter looks different from somebody I might know who might be the oldest son.
Yeah.
And I know not every household is like that,
Right.
but I always say I'm the family manager. Like I plan the family events, I organize, I get people together, I check in on their feelings and all the things. And I don't know if I always see that from sons. So I would say the expectations start very early on. And I feel like parents, they're really doing what they're taught.
Mhm.
That might be that mom, that might be what happened in her household. That was the expectations that her parents put on her, so I'm just passing these things down to my family because this is what I saw growing.
I don't know. I wonder though. I wonder if it's so much what we saw as what we want to perpetuate.
Mhm,
I don't think we're that blind. I'd like to think we're not that blind.
mhm,
But
mhm,
interestingly, I guess just full disclosure, a lot of what I described to you is mostly, a lot of my I guess a lot of the friends that we've had, I've gotten to know who, um, my son became friends with, are white women. And because of the setting, they were mostly women with money, money background. And what I saw was there was a lot of doting on their sons. I remember at one point when my son was little, feeling a little bad because,
mhm,
watching, again, we hung out a lot with friends. Watching, a mom, for example, dote on her son quite a bit, and then watching my son, I was like, okay, maybe I need to do something to make him feel a little special or whatever it is. But then after as I got older, I was like, yeah, there's some things I need to little, there's some things to mimic, some things not to mimic, some things that need to be undone because, and it was interesting to see another friend who brought that up, her own realization that the doting she had done, up until now, the teenage years, that's just not a good thing. That's working against, things that she believes in, because you begin to see how that shapes young men. And now that where my son is, he does have the opportunity to be, I do have the opportunity to get to know people from diverse backgrounds, which was very intentional,
mhm,
to see, how they raise their sons as well, giving him
mhm,
responsibilities.
mhm,
And you see in that different culture, um, you know, how that helps in shaping, how those men view their role as well. But I say that to say, I think that I think that I wonder to what extent, um, I mean, I'm sure a lot of things are acquired, right, and passed down.
mhm, mhm,
But, I guess how reflective or reflexive, you
mhm,
know,
mhm.
can you be or not be, right? To perpetuate that harm,
Mhm.
you know, on your own daughter, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
not having a daughter
Yeah.
myself, but
Right, right, right,
Mhm.
right. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that people, just like we talked about unlearning this identity, unlearning that all that you are is what you do professionally. It's the same thing with family dynamics and raising kids, like being very intentional about making sure that your son is well prepared for the world. You can't, again, we talk about control. We can't control everything, but
Mhm.
cooking, cleaning, those are adult responsibilities. Communication, being able to say how something made you feel or impacted you, that's an adult responsibility. So
Mm,
I think being able to just challenge this idea that someone can't do something or they don't need to do something because of their gender, then I think that's where we can start. That's simple. Let's teach both kids how to make a meal. Teach both kids about finances. Let's teach both kids about keeping a clean space or managing a household. And they're, of course, appropriate to their age, right? We're not gonna
right,
talk to them
right.
about how to pay taxes, all the things at 10, but giving them some responsibility, like, right? It's not maybe chores. Maybe this is you get an allowance based on this chore or something like. I think that's one way that we can actively go against that narrative at a
Mm,
young age.
yeah, that it's equally beneficial. Absolutely. And I mean, I do see that, even with my son having more responsibilities, how it's empowered him, to want to do other things as well. Um, there's this expectation we have, I think, that if we, there's this expectation that we've had that we can allow our boys to sit and do nothing and expect them to be productive men later on. Like, how does that happen? I mean, it seems like what's been happening is we do this, that dissonance, you know, it comes from maybe where we're overcompensating, right? And maybe it's coming at a
Mhm.
cost to us,
Mhm.
you know, that expectation. Sorry. I'm just wondering how that comes up, in your, thinking about mental health therapy and, um, the roles, the gender
Mhm.
roles.
Mhm, mhm. So you're asking as, with the Black women that I have worked with in either coaching, therapy,
Mm-hmm.
or speaking or whatever, how they can change the expectations that they, especially if they're raising boys, how they
Mm-hmm.
can change or maybe challenge expectations they have around what their sons are responsible for.
What their sons are responsible for, just in
Mhm,
gender roles in general,
mhm,
because I think it does more harm.
mhm, mhm,
I think it does more harm, um, because I don't know, how do you practice productivity without being productive, right?
mhm,
How do you practice independence without being independent if somebody else is doting on you all the time?
mhm.
You know?
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is, and what also could be helpful from a mental health standpoint, again, if we take the pressure away from self expectations of Black women to over function and do everything for everybody, to have expectations not only for your partner, but also to have those same expectations for your kids, and that's both kids regardless of their gender. And that's it. That's the statement. That's it. Have those, instead of over functioning and doing all the things for everybody, let's have expectations for our partner, and let's also have those expectations for both of our gender, both of our children, and not just saying, oh, one person is responsible for all these things, also putting those same expectations on the just the same expectations as well. That's what I would think, would recommend, and I feel like would be helpful.
Yeah. Wow. And the only reason I brought up, I know that you focus on Black women, but I
Mhm,
bring that up mainly because it almost seems that, our function and our role is to, um, and what we're being prepared for sometimes, it seems like it's to
mhm,
adorn other people, right?
Mhm.
And so that's
Mhm.
really why I brought that up. Um, one of the things we talked about when we met, you said your focus is on women with racialized stress
Mhm.
and racial trauma and how it comes up in the white spaces. I wonder if you can expand a little bit on that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. One of the things I work with, yes, is Black women who've experienced racial trauma, racialized stress from working in predominantly white environments. So it's the same thing. It's the hypervisibility versus invisibility. So maybe in your environment, you micromanage by your boss while also feeling like just left out and overwhelmed because you're the only person in your environment who looks like you. This constant idea of having to code switch and not being able to be your authentic self within your work environments and just constantly feeling stressed. So it could come
Mhm.
out from a physiological standpoint. So again, stress, so high blood pressure, headaches, um, issues around stomach aches is another one I've seen. So a lot of just of those physiological symptoms that we don't always think about, like, is this have something to do with the food I'm eating? And also maybe it has something to do with the stress that I'm experiencing as well. So it's like those, and then when I think what racial trauma really looks like is issues with racism over time. So it starts out as those smaller microaggressions and it just continues to build. And one of the things that I saw in my research and also see with folks as I work with is these issues around racism and racialized stress don't just start in adulthood. They might also be able to identify moments of racism that they've experienced throughout their lifetime. And it's just really heightened in those work environments because is happening on a routine basis.
Hmm. Wow. That's something that I did at one point started looking at just how people are micromanaged and how, the micromanager. I know that, your work focuses on helping those who are micromanaged and to think about and cope. What
Mhm,
kind of advice do you give them?
mhm,
I'm curious about from the other perspective too.
mhm,
Um, what would you advise um, people who like to to
mhm.
micromanage? Hmm.
Mhm. So for folks who like to micromanage, I would say this. I feel like a lot of people who in the management roles, they really take on identities of their companies. And
Mm. Mm.
that's no shade at all. But
Nope.
naturally when you become in a management role, it does start to feel like this. Like this is the company I own. So we'll just talk about it from a retention and a business standpoint, it is cheaper to be able to work with and retain good talent than it is to have this person quit, and now you have to hire somebody else and train them, right? That's taking up time, that's taking up resources, that's taking up revenue. All of these things could just be halted if you just show up differently and understand where is this micromanagement coming from? Did this
Mm.
person do something wrong or is this a personality mismatch? Am I treating this person differently because maybe they're not just like me? I'm asking them what they're doing for the weekend. They're not giving me all these details about their lives. Are they making me feel insecure because as I'm having conversations with them, I'm realizing that this person has a lot of expertise. Like, where does this need to micromanage actually come from? Am I dealing with my own anxiety? Am I feeling like I'm not doing well in my job, or is upper management having some type of expectation from me? So those are the things that I would challenge somebody who's a manager in the micromanagement space to sit with. On the flip side, I think a lot of times what I see for a person who has been in that toxic workspace that's causing that racialized stress is even if they leave those environments, sometimes they have been broken down so much from a self-esteem and self-worth standpoint that we really working on building those things back up. So now this same person who maybe was a high achieving Black women who thrived on these accomplishments and doing these things, now they're afraid. They have imposter syndrome. They don't want to speak up. They're afraid. They don't think that they're adequate because they've had a toxic boss or had a toxic work environment that has made them feel that way about themselves. So there's a lot of work around self-esteem and self-worth rebuilding because of being in that toxic workspace. And then again, because Black women are so complex, which I love, a lot of times that experience again it can be tied back to something in childhood. Maybe you grew up in an environment where you felt inadequate, whether it be from a parent or the absence of a parent, like, or a sibling. It's all these things that can come up that it doesn't just show up in the workspace, but it's a very complex. It shows up, like you talked about, in relationships and lack of expectations because you don't think you deserve XYZ. So it's very, very complex. But I
Mhm.
definitely enjoy this work and feel like just my role and my area of expertise is very necessary for
Yeah,
this community.
absolutely. Wow. You know, there are a couple things I'm thinking about what you said. Would love to delve a little bit more into um because the micromanagement part of it, because it almost seems as if in our positioning, especially as Black women, it's almost like we're viewed that we are there to that we're there to only fulfill, you know, that purpose, right? Of I don't know. I guess I'm just, I gotta say, I guess I'm trying to figure out how, have you looked into the remnants of slavery in terms of, how this comes into play, um, with the need to micromanage, and how they, how that perspective or view of a Black woman's role, um, might even be influenced by that. Have you looked at any data or anything on that? I'm just curious.
Mhm, mhm. I haven't looked specifically in how the role in slavery connects directly with the need to micromanage, but I will say a reoccurring theme when I've talked to Black women about this work, again, whether it's professionally coaching, speaking engagements, or just random conversation with Black women I meet, is that I mean, in 4 or 5 different spaces, just even in the last few weeks, folks have talked about being micromanaged by another Black woman and how
Mm,
just overwhelming that has been because it's like we have a different how it hurts seems to hurt more because we have a different expectation of someone who has a shared demographic and background.
mhm,
Um and I know it has to do with internalized racism. So there's a reason why you feel the need to um feel threatened by maybe a person up under you. I don't know if you're subscribed to this narrative that it can only be one Black woman in this space. So now that is why you are micromanaging and causing issues and um really being and then I've even heard somebody say they feel like certain people are higher or some people are higher in those roles. Black women might be higher in those roles for the purpose of creating that narrative to the other Black women. I don't know how true that is, but I will just say that if there's a Black woman in a role and she might be giving other Black women who she manages a harder time, especially through micromanagement, there's definitely a layer of internalized racism that happens there. So I have to do some more research on um slavery and this idea of there can only be one person in the space. Like I've heard that, that's a
mhm,
thing. People feel like they can only be one Black person in this space.
mhm.
But I would love to do some additional research on how that narrative came out of slavery or at what point in the last few centuries where did that idea come from? I know
Mhm.
it's tied to slavery, like most things,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering at what point did that, and we talked about stereotypes earlier, at what point did that idea that only one Black person or Black woman can be in this space, like where did that come
Yeah. Well, I've heard of situations where, sometimes people have feel like they were pitted against each other because there's that one role created, that you are almost put in a position to compete,
Mhm.
right? Because that's why you're also the loner. And so you put in that position and you both have to try to prove yourselves, right? And you try to outcompete each other. Um, especially in, um, and I'm gonna guess, well, because this person is, in one of those, what's the word? Especially in those competitive positions, let's just say, right?
Mhm.
I wondered the extent because we do say, I guess in some ways trauma begets trauma, right? Whoever it is. And I've had that experience too. I've had it in both ways, right? Being micromanaged by a black woman as well, and by a white man as well.
Mhm.
In the different positions I was in. And yeah, I agree. Having it come from a black woman, it's something you quite don't expect, right?
Mhm.
I wonder how colorism maybe have come up for you, because I think I've been blind to colorism until
Mhm.
I attended a talk and realized, I wonder if some of that's been in there, right?
Mhm.
That I just never
Mhm.
noticed or never thought of because
Mhm.
my grandmother, who I love dearly, is, very black, dark. And I just, I wonder, how has that come up? Even looking at this type of trauma or and even racialized trauma.
Absolutely, absolutely. So colorism definitely comes up a lot in the clientele or whether they're coaching, therapy, speaking engagements, whatever. That does come up where a person will have a different or additional layer of trauma because they have darker skin, or even when we talk about this ongoing theme around hair texture, right? Like feeling the need to only being able to wear hairstyles. So I think they say texturism, being able to
Mm,
wear hairstyles in a certain way, or which black hair texture 3A versus 4C is acceptable and what feels acceptable in certain environments. Like even recently, I don't know if you saw where the tennis player, Coco, I think last name is Bruff, she
mm,
was critiqued most recently because of her hair texture and
mm,
like the ad that she did. Now, this is a person who's achieving, doing very well in tennis, which we know is not a predominantly black sport.
mhm,
And people are focusing on the way her hair looks.
mm,
Right? And she's also a
so
darker
shallow.
skin, right, and she's also a darker skinned black woman. So even if she was maybe lighter skin, who knows that they had even pointed out this whole hair thing. So I think sometimes people, even other black folks, subconsciously have this additional critique of other black people because of their darker skin, or make perception of what's
Mhm,
attractive or what's acceptable. So colorism definitely comes up
mhm.
in the work um in the work that I do.
And what about in terms of reverse colorism?
Mhm, mhm.
How does that come up?
Yeah, so I feel like this is a very, I don't know how to describe this topic, right? It's like reverse racism, right? We know reverse racism doesn't actually exist because whiteness holds the power. So I would say that if a person feels like they are being treated differently because they have a lighter skin,
Mhm,
I don't think it would be classified as reverse colorism, because when you
mm,
have the closer proximity to whiteness, even if it's just your skin color, which you cannot help, you still might be afforded certain opportunities, even if you don't realize it, even if you don't feel it, you still might get afforded certain opportunities because people feel you they feel something about you because you have a lighter skin. So I definitely have heard that come up. I've had people describe how they felt someone was jealous or treated them differently because they had lighter skin, and that's something that we have to sit and process and think about and not invalidate, because I'm sure there's experience that very much valid and true, and that might also is still saying that reverse colorism is not. I don't think reverse colorism is a thing, and whether you feel it or not, you absolutely have some level of privilege by being lighter skinned, just like you have a level of privilege by being able-bodied, right? You have a certain level of privilege by coming from a middle-class household versus someone and who would be below the poverty line. Again, even if you're not a millionaire, that doesn't mean that you don't have there's not some level of privilege. You might not even be able to identify, but at some point in your life, somebody treated you better or differently
Mhm.
because of the skin tone, even
Wow.
if you don't feel it. I'm sure that that has happened. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
It's funny. I only use the word reverse colorism not because I've ever heard it, but I
Mhm. Yeah, I know
only
what you mean.
mainly
Mhm.
mainly because I've noticed that you focused on the prejudice against darker skin, whereas I've
Mhm.
heard other people who talk about it also
Mhm.
focus on the
Yep.
prejudice against lighter skin, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's very interesting. You're right. It does. That does come with a privilege.
Mhm.
But I guess it wouldn't be fun for anyone either way,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it also depends on the space you're in, right?
Mhm.
That privilege may be reversed, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
maybe depending.
Yeah, but that's a strong maybe because I
Mhm,
don't know if the privilege is reversed.
mm,
And I'm saying I know folks who would talk about growing up in households where they are treated favorably
mm,
by a parent or a grandparent because they were the lighter skinned child or grandchild in their families.
yeah,
Right? So the privilege it just
I
feels
see what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah, it feels very complex and it might feel invalidating um, to feel like, "Oh, but I might be also teased by this person at school or something because I had this skin complexion." It's just very complex, and again, it all
yeah,
ties back it ties all the way back to slavery and all of these things that we've been talking about today, they didn't come from nowhere, these self-expectations, because it's hard to even change all of these things that we're experiencing by thinking about what are the structural implications, what's gonna happen, what needs to happen systemically so that we don't feel these same level of pressures or different expectations for certain genders or different expectations for our daughters versus our son or what happens in our relationships, what happens at work. All these things are things that need to change systemically as well. But yeah, we've touched on so many great things in our conversation, like all the things.
say it's funny. My next question, I was thinking, I was about to say, you know, I know I took us in this direction too. Like, what would you want? Like, let's just say I didn't ask these questions. What would
Mhm.
you want people to know or to focus on, especially when thinking
Mhm.
about the work you do?
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the great thing about our conversation is it all falls within the work that I do, right? I could be
Okay. Yeah.
dealing with the person who comes to me for coaching around burnout and belonging and
Okay, that makes
racialized
sense.
stress in their environments. But on the flip side, it could have a therapy client who also understands that maybe some of this, if I'm that micromanager the micro person who micromanage and I realized, through our conversation, I do have some level of internalized stress. So let's internalize racism. So let's work through that. Oh, that did
Mhm.
tie back to how I was treated in childhood. Oh, that does remind me of a parent who was absent or a parent that treated me differently or expectations on me versus my brother. So all of the things that we have talked about today I feel like all are under the umbrella of working with Black women. So I feel like it's all relevant, but I guess the main thing is just being able to talk about just the work that I do. So the
Mhm.
racialized trauma, helping organizations also establish psychological safety for their employees. Again, when you're thinking about organizations, they're focused on revenue. And again,
Mhm.
research reflects it is easier to treat your employees better who are already doing well and retain them than for them to be quit and you have to hire and train somebody else all over again. So also I also do in addition to speaking for corporations, I also speak for organizations as well. I do coaching for Black women. I do
Mhm.
therapy as well. So those are the main things. All of these things are tied together. So I don't think anything was off record or
Mhm.
wasn't relatable because it all to me still falls under the umbrella of Black mental wellness and the things that
Mhm.
we experience,
Yeah.
the complexities that we experience.
Now, I'm curious. If you want to provide some insights, what do you focus on? With or helping organizations.
Mhm,
With
mhm.
this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with organizations, I focus on psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
So that looks like being able to create safe environments for all employees. That looks
Mm,
like what it looks like from a leadership standpoint. How do you create an environment where
mm-hmm.
your employee can thrive and not feel burnt out, not feel overwhelmed, not feel like they don't belong. Also talk about what does mental wellness look like. So let's highlight the resources that are available to us, whether that looks like what are the EAP, employee assistance programs available, what are other options for therapy out here in the world that exists. I also from an organizational standpoint, I like to do assessments around kind of seeing where everybody is so I can get a better idea of how I can tailor my services to that individual organization. Also provide like a tool, psychological safety toolkit, so that includes resources, coping skills, talking about grounding and breathing exercises, and all the things that could just reframing your mindset and behavior and all the things that could just be helpful. So just first looking at the company, what they can do, and then also looking at the individual, what they're responsible for as far as their mental wellness goes as well.
yeah. Now, what would a psychologically safe space for a Black woman look like?
hmm Yeah. So a psychologically safe space for a Black woman would look like being, first of all, not micromanaged. Second thing would look like not being the only one in your department, right? So I know that could be a challenge now that we have these anti-DI movements going on, but the reality of it is that there's a space where there's only one person so two things can't be true. We can't be the most educated demographic, and then you look at a company and there's like one Black person there. Like that don't the math is not what did they say? The math is not mathing. That doesn't make sense. So are you in the intent? Is there something happening even in your hiring process where someone is turned away because of what their name, the school that they went to? So that I would say starting there, like what does the demographic makeup look like of the organization that you're in? I think the second thing is and having places where folks are not expected to take work home with them. And if they do, then that means they need to be able to flex be able to flex the next day. It also
Mm,
looks like being able to, as a management, it has been okay with being, and I don't want to say the word is challenged, but if sometimes a person can recognize something when they're not a part of the management team that they can't recognize because they're in it. This again, they're aligning themselves with the organization. You have a difficult time taking that feedback. So allow your employees, creating a space and environment where your employees can share feedback and being
mm,
open to it. Right. So
yeah.
I think is what a psychological safe environment looks like. People will be able to speak up without fear of consequence or retaliation, in an environment where folks can just thrive. And it's not just one type of person who is promoted or one type of person who is placed on a platform, because I've heard from numerous um Black women clients where coaching clients where they have not been promoted for not a good reason other than it wasn't a good fit in terms of personality. That was the fit. You're not a good fit because your personality isn't just like mine. You don't do the same thing. You don't come in here and tell me all the same things about your life and they don't align with mine. And then they've had to train the person who was taking the role that they were the ones who should have gotten, or somebody has been hired and promoted over them who has less experience than they do. So I see that happen
Mm-hmm.
a lot. So if there is
Yeah.
an environment that's being created where there's someone is promoted over, like being able to explain why is that? What does that look like? So yes, that's what I would say a psychologically, just as I'm thinking psychological safety
Right.
environment would look like.
And I'm also thinking of the more subtle things that happen, which is they're hired so that their ideas can be used to promote somebody else, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so they become not promotion worthy, quote
Mhm.
unquote. because they were viewed as, because being viewed as lesser than means that you're there to, um, there's a word I've been thinking about for a while, because you are there to, yeah, to promote others
Mhm.
and just not yourself.
Mhm.
I think that's also
Absolutely.
what's viewed. Um, wow. Wow. So what are some things you want to leave the audience with?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so I want to leave the audience with, if you are a black woman and you have listened to something today and you felt triggered, because I know when I'm reading something, I'm like, "Is she talking about me? Like, you wrote in this book about me? You don't even know me." But if you are triggered, or I want you to sit with that. I want you to be able to sit, reflect, whether that be, like, through journaling. Yeah, I think journaling would be most helpful. And it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be a super long journal like a book or anything like that, but just being able to write out, like, what in this conversation did I relate to and I feel triggered by. So again, as we talk about, just I think one of the main takeaways I think is so important is that self expectations and expectations of others.
Mhm.
So if you have an expectation in allowing other folks to help you, allowing other people to assist you, and if they don't do things just like you would do them, that doesn't mean they're wrong. So
Mhm.
not over functioning, not feeling like you need to be the one to carry everything, being able to set boundaries, and it doesn't matter who it's with. Sometimes you might have to set a boundary with your own mom, and if it comes to that, that's fine. Prioritizing yourself and what that looks like what thinking about what it is that you need. And another big one that I like to tell people to do is to do like a time audit. Look, just sit and think, what takes about week, what drains me, and how can we move some things around so that I don't feel depleted at the
Mhm.
end of the day. I feel some level of ways to re-energize me and to pour into myself.
Wow. 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 You mentioned book.
Mhm.
I know you're referring to, an example scenario. Was there a book that I don't remember you talking about a book you'd written. Did
Mhm.
you?
No, I have a journal, a ebook that folks can purchase. So it's a book called Healing While Black, and it is for the high achieving Black woman who has dealt with racial trauma. So there are just some exercises in there around reflection,
Okay.
coping skills, the power of community, the power of boundary setting, the power of unlearning some of these self expectations,
Mhm.
and being able, just like you said, I don't wanna say putting expectations on others, but just not it's you don't have to be the one to carry everything. So I do have, that ebook, and I also tell a couple personal stories about myself, because that's what I appreciate about being, in this space of being a business owner. I feel like I could also say, "Hey, I experienced some of these things as well.
Mm.
This is what it looked like for me in a work environment. This is what it looked like for me personally. Here's what I did differently. Here's what helped me." But also I have the research background as well, and again, just the clinical background. So yeah, I think this journal could just be a helpful tool, because not everybody's at the place where they want to go to therapy for one-on-one. So there might be some good tools that we can use until we arrive at that space.
Now, I know we were wrapping things up, but listen to you talk. I wanted to ask one more question. What about
Mhm.
trauma for students?
Mhm.
Being a student, is that something you have seen frequently or?
Yes, yes, yes. So in my work with college students, so
Mhm.
my first internship was actually there at North Carolina Central, where I did my first internship over in the counseling center, and then I worked at Shaw University,
Okay.
University of North Carolina Greensboro, NC State. So in each one of these roles, of course, when folks see a black counselor, they want to come and they want to, like, okay, let me see what this black counselor has for me. But what I see a lot of trauma with students is same things that we're describing, but it's just it feels different.
Mm.
So when I worked in those predominantly white environments with Black students, the racialized trauma that they experienced, so being treated differently by professors because of their identities, not feeling like they didn't have the same opportunities, um, feeling like an imposter, like maybe coming from an environment where you were top 10 in your class and now coming into this environment where you just feel lost and learning how many resources your colleagues have to their
Mm.
disposal, right? Their parents
Mm.
paying for this, parents doing that, and just having to navigate the financial trauma that could come up. I've had
Mm.
clients who, in the past, students who maybe were getting like a refund check and having to send it back to their households. Their parents were calling them at school to help manage something with a younger sibling. So these are some of the things that I saw come up with the college students that I have worked with in the past. So yeah, the trauma is all over. It might just look a little different than what I see with, and I don't say my adult because college students are adults, of course, but
Mhm.
with my young adults versus my
Yeah.
people who might have graduated already and further
Mhm.
in their careers and lives.
Wow. Looks like we need to have another conversation because I feel like the college student trauma can,
Uh-huh.
I think we can do another hour and
Yes, 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 absolutely, absolutely. Undergrad versus grad students, right? Versus professor versus person working in student affairs, all the things, how it shows up differently, but how there are also some emerging themes that come up across all of those populations.
I am curious, but I will have to table my curiosity for now. Wow. Well, Dr. Grant Goodman, thank you so much for your insights today. I feel like the time went really quickly here.
Yes, it did. It did. It did.
So I will, if you can give me the links and I'll post them of your
Mhm,
ebook and information.
mhm.
Um, and so thank you again. And I want to say if you like this episode, please like it and subscribe so you can find out about the next episode. And thank you for joining today.
Thank you.